Well, we all know Mitt, Newton, Rick, but how about Rocky? A former two-term mayor of Salt Lake City who's also running for president of the United States and doing so under a new third political party that he helped establish, the Justice Party. His primary message: end the corruption in Washington and a government sold to the highest bidder so that America can have the debate it deserves on everything from war to health care. Sound familiar? With us now, presidential candidate Rocky Anderson, the former mayor of Salt Lake, and welcome to the program.
It's a real pleasure.
Before we get into the issues, how's it going?
It's going great, and I think the reason is that our message resonates with everybody across partisan boundaries. I don't think there's anybody in this country that hasn't absolutely had it with the corrupting influence of money in our government.
So if you were to become president of the United States, what would you do about it?
Well, the first thing I would do is call for a constitutional amendment, alert the people of this country as to how this has come about, how absolutely devastating it has been with the greatest economic disparity in this country since the 1920s. We're truly living in a new Gilded Age, and how we got to that point. It has been the result of corruption. It's been the result of blatant bribery by those who have the money, and there is a solution, and it's a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United case.
And why is it you think that the current president hasn't assumed the posture that you just described, or, for that matter, his opponents?
He's a beneficiary, and so are they. Both of these parties help create this system. They both thrive on it. They both help sustain this corrupt system, and there's no way they can break out of it. The Republican and Democratic parties are lying to the American people, and they can't tell them the truth because they're so locked in to this system of utter corruption.
I just looked down your issues. You would seek to address split up the too big to fail banks, to narrow the gap between the tax rate on wealth and work, or investment and labor, cut defense spending, tax incentives for hiring in the United States. Why is it that these types of issues aren't more central, you think, in the Republican debates or the presidential debate right now? Why does this require a third party?
Because neither of these parties will assume these positions, because they run entirely counter to those with whom they're basically on retainer. I mean, these folks in Congress and the White House are acting as if they're the paid hired guns for those with the money, and it's all against the public interest in this country. Every major public policy failure can be tied to that corrupting influence of money. You just have to follow the money. The failure we're the only country in the industrialized world that doesn't provide essential health care for every citizen. We pay twice as much, more than twice as much, on average, per capita in our health care system than the rest of the industrialized world. We get mediocre outcomes, and we don't provide universal care like every other country does in the industrialized world. Why is that? The corrupting influence of money from the insurance industry. Same with high drug prices and the money from the pharmaceutical industries. Look at the military-industrial complex, the waste in our military budget. And we know why that is. Why do these Congress people and the White House support continued funding for these wasteful programs, like the F-22, for instance? We have Republicans and Democrats alike fighting for continued funding for these programs because there are contractors spread around, and these contractors know what they're doing. They get subcontractors for the F-22 in 44 states, so all these folks in Washington will fight to take the bacon back home to their states or to their districts. And it's so counter to all of our interests. And then, of course, the utter failure to provide the essential international leadership on climate change. We'll never see that from the Republican or Democratic Party because of the influence of the fossil fuel industries.
My final question for you: are you concerned that, or how do you reconcile the spoiler effect of anybody who postures himself as a third party, whether it's a spoiler for the president or his opponent?
That's such a great question, because it's what kept me from getting into this. I was really pondering that for a long time, because from my point of view, we should never do harm to our country. But I came to the conclusion, and I think this is absolutely fundamental. If we vote for a Republican or Democrat in this race, we're simply moving the players around but keeping the system in place. If we want to change the system, we need a new paradigm. We need new people who are going to commit to represent the public interest, and that's exactly why we're doing what we're doing in this race.
Well, you certainly are speaking my language, and I suspect a lot of folks who watch this program and in this country, and I wish you the best of luck. And if nothing else, in provoking this debate to sound a bit more like the conversation you and I just had. It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you so much.
Real pleasure.
Rocky Anderson, running for President of the United States under the third-party ticket, the Justice Party, former two-term mayor of Salt Lake City, and turning now to the leader of the two-party pack on the right, Mitt Romney, opening up today about how much he pays in taxes.
What's the effective rate I've been paying? Well, it's probably closer to the 15% rate than anything, because my last 10 years, my income comes overwhelmingly from investments made in the past rather than ordinary income.
Well, the latest poll from the Washington Post and ABC shows that Romney has twice the support of his nearest Republican competitor. There is, in effect, no race here other than the race to the bottom that Rocky Anderson was just describing in America. Let's bring in the Tuesday mega panel, Karen Finney, Susan Del Percio, and Jimmy Williams. Jimmy, somebody like Rocky Anderson certainly speaks of a strong rhetoric. What is the tolerance or capacity for any third party to engage in this context? And I know it tends to be dismissed, but at the same time, Ross Perot came really out of nowhere and got, 20% of the vote?
Well, I mean, what Mayor Anderson just talked about was a very populist message. And if you go back and you look at the history of all third-party candidacies, they were all populist messages. Remember Ross Perot, that giant sucking sound? George Wallace, you name it, every single one of them ran on a populism platform. And, I mean, they all did. I mean, some of them did better than others. This is the first I've ever heard of this guy, frankly, and that's kind of sad and a pathetic sort of statement on our current politics. But I think he'd probably do decently well if he had the money and people knew about him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's interesting, Susan, Karen, regardless of a given political candidate, do either of you get the sense that this presidential debate is getting a little bit more pressure to focus on talking about some of these things, regardless of who the candidates are? Susan?
Not yet, unfortunately. I think we may see it if you see enough of an outrage of people saying, none of the above when you get into the Republican nominee versus President Obama. But, just to step back to what Jimmy said for a minute, I don't think you're going to see real change within the parties, not until we have more than a third party. We need a third, fourth, and fifth party to really break it up, because otherwise it's going to always be the two against that third party, and they'll actually gang up against them.
Yeah, Karen?
Well, I just think I want to point out one bright spot just from the perspective of process in terms of having the debate we deserve. If you look at what has been accomplished in Wisconsin, where they've collected the 1 million signatures that they need for the recall, where the people there have said, no, we're not just going to brush this under the rug and move on. We have some demands of this governor, lieutenant governor, and these Republican members of the legislature, and we're not going to just take, no for an answer. I think it's very impressive. I mean, the guy only won by a little over 1 million votes. And I think it is the kind of activism, and it's a lot of very hard work on the part of a lot of people, but it's the kind of activism that we're got to be prepared to engage in if we really want the debate, as you talk about, that we deserve. We've got to do the work.
Yeah, and take action. I mean, that was an action that Karen talked about. They wanted to recall somebody. They did the petitions. It gave people a reason to focus around a purpose.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful point and very well made.